He remembered the sky burning. Commander Cade wasn't a sentimental man. War had stripped that from him a long time ago. By the time you've buried your third squad under alien moons, all the speeches and flags mean nothing. You survive or you don't. That's it. And yet, as he sat in the scorched remains of the forward outpost on Thessar 9, watching the silent black sky, he couldn't stop thinking about the day the unknown ship first appeared. It wasn't human. He was sure of that. Humanity didn't build things that clean. No markings, no emissions, no transponder, no radiation bleed, not even a shimmer on the LiDAR. It just appeared, like a god blinking into reality. Size of a moon, blacker than space around it, shaped like something that had never touched a planet. The Empire's top scanners couldn't penetrate it. The AI war chief said it wasn't real, and then it vanished. Not warped, not jumped, vanished. Like it decided it had seen enough. 3 hours later, the capital planet burned. Not invaded, not attacked. Burned. From orbit, the feeds showed nothing. No energy signature, no ships, no weapons. One moment, the Imperial sky fortress gleamed with 2 billion lives. The next, just dust. The Empire's reaction was predictable. Arrogance followed by panic. They blamed human insurgents. They always did. Humanity had clawed their way into the Empire's fold a few decades ago, mostly through combat and attrition. We didn't bow, didn't assimilate like the others. So they kept us close, like a knife at their belt. And now, that knife was the only thing still breathing. Cade took a slow drag from the filterless stick clenched between his teeth. It was old Terran tobacco, illegal in most sectors, carcinogenic in everyone. He didn't care. His lungs were already shredded from 50 years of combat in vacuum armor. One more poison didn't matter. His comm chirped once, a short pulse. Code red. He stood slowly, the ache in his bones familiar. His armor hung on a rack, scarred and pitted, the once glossy black paint nearly stripped down to raw alloy. He stepped into it like second skin, feeling the servos wake and sync with his nerves. The HUD flared. A map popped up, then another notification. 6th Fleet, offline. Sector 7, lost contact. Command, silent. He blinked. That was 3 entire branches of the Empire's military. Gone. The unknown ship didn't return. No sound, no message, no warning. But one by one, the systems were going dark. Not just power, not just people. History itself was being erased. Empires could endure war. They couldn't survive being forgotten. Cade, a voice cracked through his internal comms. It was Darren, the last intel officer left on Thessar 9. They're saying Earth might be next. Cade spat out the half-burnt cigarette and crushed it under his heel. If it was going to hit Earth, it would have done it already. We're not the target. Then who is? Cade stared out at the starless sky. Whoever thought they were in charge. The Empire had ruled for 10,000 years. They believed themselves unbreakable. They subjugated over 200 sentient races, bent entire star systems to their law, erased rebellions with orbital bombardments, and yet one ship, one black void, had humiliated them. The last fleet response was a broadcast sent from Imperial High Admiral Kurathon before his cruiser blinked out of existence mid-sentence. Cade had replayed it 50 times. Unknown vessel appears to emit no aggression signal, no life form, no physical presence. Wait. The stars behind it are wrong. It's warping light. Oh gods, it's looking at us. It's... Silence. Then static. Cade hadn't stopped thinking about that last word. Looking. Not attacking. Not engaging, just observing. Like it wanted to see how empires died. He didn't care about the Empire, not really. It had enslaved humanity, branded them second-class soldiers, used them as shock troops. But if this thing was strong enough to erase a godlike civilization in silence, what hope did Earth have? The comm buzzed again. This time it was a ground ping, a single word. Descent. Cade grabbed his rifle, pulled the charging lever, and stepped into the open airlock. His boots crunched on blackened soil. He looked up. There were no stars, just a shape blotting out the sky. No engine, no sound. Just the feeling that something had arrived, something that had seen enough. Cade didn't flinch. "I don't know who you are," he muttered into the darkness, "but I've killed gods before." And then he raised his rifle. The air was too quiet. It wasn't the usual eerie silence of an empty battlefield. It was deeper than that, a silence that pressed on your skull like pressure in the deep ocean. Cade had felt fear before. He'd charged at biomechs that tore through armor like cloth. He'd waded through plasma fire and stepped over the mangled corpses of friends. But this silence? It was wrong. Even his armor, with all its stabilizers and climate buffers, hummed strangely under the black sky, like it was trying to scream, but had forgotten how. Cade's HUD was glitching. Not violently, not enough to be considered sabotage, just off. The time display blinked from 00001 to 00000 and back again, like it was stuck in a loop that didn't belong to any system clock. Coordinates spun in place. Atmospheric readings flatlined. No wind, no heat, no gravity flux. Nothing. Still, he marched forward, the rifle gripped tight in his gloved hands. The object, no, the shape, in the sky didn't move. It didn't descend. It didn't grow. It just sat there, blotting out existence, and he swore he could feel its attention. "Thessor Command to Ground Recon Unit 1, a voice came through. It was Darren again. "Is it still above you?" Cade stopped walking. "Not above, just there, existing." "Are you receiving any environmental changes?" "Negative. Feels like I'm walking through a dead man's dream." A pause. Then a sigh. "Cade, we just lost contact with Sector 3 and 4. Gone. Comms dead, power dead, AI links severed. No explosions, no movement, just empty." "That's 8 sectors." "No, it's 12 now. They just lost contact with Sectors 6 through 10. That's over 90 million people unaccounted for." Cade swallowed, his throat dry despite the internal hydration system pumping clean water every 15 minutes. 90 million, he whispered. "That's not war. That's extinction." He could hear Darren's breath on the other end. Shaky. Fast. "I pulled the last sensor drone feed from above Sector 7 before we lost it. I think you need to see this." Before Cade could respond, a visual override flickered into his HUD. The drone feed jittered, corrupted at first, but then it cleared. The footage was shaky, clearly damaged, but it showed the city beneath the observation tower. Cade narrowed his eyes. Everything looked normal for the first few seconds. People moved, cars hovered, lights glowed, and then the shadows deepened. No one noticed at first, not until the shadows started stretching unnaturally, like hands pulling away from their owners. Not like tricks of the light, not like camera distortion. The shadows moved independently. They twisted, slithered, and then they left their owners altogether, staining the ground like black oil. People froze, screamed, ran. But it didn't matter. The moment their shadows left, their bodies stopped existing. Not exploded, not turned to ash, just erased, as if someone hit backspace on the universe. The feed cut to black. Cade stood there, mouth tight, every part of his soldier's brain screaming that this couldn't be real, that it defied physics, that it defied logic. But deep down, something more primal whispered that this wasn't war at all. It was judgment. And whatever had made that ship, if it even was a ship, wasn't here to fight. It was here to end. "Cade." Darren's voice trembled. That footage was 60 seconds old. By now, Thesser 9 might be nothing but memory. Cade exhaled through his nose. You still there? Only because we're shielded underground. Our system's disconnected from the planetary grid. Full manual controls, old school, analog backups. Stay that way. Don't connect to anything. Don't let the AI activate. If this thing is erasing through data channels, it's not just hunting flesh. Copy. What are you going to do? Cade looked back up at the black void hanging above him. Something stupid. Without another word, he turned and started marching toward the last known epicenter, the place where the shadows had begun to stretch. He moved across crumbled streets, scorched pavement, twisted metal. The city was silent. No bodies, no blood, just absence. He passed playgrounds with swings still moving, park benches with half-eaten food resting on them, cars parked in lanes, engines still humming, no drivers in sight. It wasn't a battlefield. It was a museum of disappearance. Half an hour later, he reached the exact spot. It was a square. Circular fountain in the middle, long since dry, with crumbling marble and ornamental alien plants still trying to bloom. Cade stepped onto the fountain's edge and turned a slow circle. Nothing. He was about to curse when his boots shifted, just slightly. A vibration passed up his leg, light but noticeable. He dropped to one knee, pressed his gloved hand against the cracked tiles, and felt it again. A pulse. Not seismic, not mechanical, rhythmic. A heartbeat? He quickly unlatched a handheld scanner from his belt, one of the old Terran models that worked without network reliance. No uplinks, just raw sensors. He activated it. At first it read empty, but then, slowly, something changed. Not a signal, a pattern. There, in the surrounding walls, beneath the pavement, woven into the very architecture, a lattice. Geometric shapes, circles within circles, fractal lines forming impossible spirals. These weren't designed by the Empire. These were older. Much older. He turned on the scanner's overlay. The spirals pulsed once, twice, then the scanner shut off. Dead. No warning. Just off. Cade stood up slowly. Darren, you copy? No response. Darren. Still nothing. He reached for the emergency flare, lit it. Red smoke hissed out. Primitive. Reliable. Above him the sky shimmered. The shape had changed. No longer just a black void. It had become translucent, semi-visible, like staring at a massive glacier through a storm. He saw angles that didn't belong in 3 dimensions, structures that bent inward and out at the same time. It wasn't built, it was grown, or evolved. And in the center of it, movement. Cade zoomed in with his visor. Something stood there, tall, humanoid in shape, but not in motion. No armor, no clothes, just a silhouette of light moving like smoke. It didn't have eyes, but it was looking at him. Cade felt his chest tighten. His armor compressed slightly, detecting a rise in blood pressure and internal stress levels. Not yet, he muttered. Don't panic. He raised his rifle, not in defense, but in defiance. He was a man. He was a soldier. And no matter how ancient or alien this thing was, it had come to a planet where humans still breathed. Why are you here? He growled, unsure if he expected an answer. And then the thing moved. Not physically, but the space around it twisted. The city darkened, as if time itself dimmed. And Cade heard a voice, not in his ears, but behind his thoughts. Witness. The word echoed like thunder inside his skull. His knees buckled. He dropped, face slamming into the stone. Blood ran from his nose. The word didn't speak to him. It rewrote him. Images poured into his mind. Planets burning, empires collapsing, gods screaming, races wiped out in silence, and one constant in all of it. The ship. It had no name. It didn't come from a place. It was called when civilizations reached their peak, when pride replaced purpose, when power turned inward. It was summoned by hubris, like a cosmic reaper drawn to arrogance. Cade screamed and clutched his head. The voice returned. They built eternity on the bones of the weak. They claimed divinity through domination. They erased. We erase them. We. Cade coughed. Blood dripped from his lips. Who are you? The sky flickered. The shape began to fold back in on itself. The end and the beginning. Cade forced himself up on shaking arms. Why spare us? Why not finish it? There was silence. Then, because you remember pain, and you bleed honestly. The light vanished. The sky cleared. And just like that, it was gone. Darren's voice came back, sputtering through static. Cade, are you still alive? Cade collapsed backward, staring at the stars above. Yeah, he whispered, but the Empire's dead. The stars had never looked that sharp before. Commander Cade lay motionless on the cracked tiles of the dead plaza, staring up at the clear sky. The unknown ship was gone, vanished the same way it arrived. No sound, no flash, no trace. But something inside him had changed. Not mentally, not spiritually, physically. His neural link built into the base of his spine was shorting in and out. The HUD across his visor kept resetting itself. Oxygen flow inside the helmet dipped, surged, then normalized. He tore it off with a sharp hiss and gulped the cold alien air. It stung, sharp and metallic, like he'd just inhaled battery acid and regret. His head pounded with what felt like old memories and new nightmares stitched together. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat from that ship's silent scream. The voice still echoed faintly, somewhere behind his consciousness. Because you bleed honestly. He didn't know what that meant. But he knew this. The Empire was over. Still breathing, Cade? Darren's voice broke through the static again. It sounded weaker now, like he was calling from another galaxy. Cade winced, pushing himself up with stiff arms. Barely. What's your status? We've gone dark, fully analog. No uplinks, no AI, no contact with other sectors. We're getting short-range distress pings, but most are just bursts. Half-finished messages, corrupted signals. People are disappearing mid-sentence, like the data of them is being wiped as they speak. Cade looked around the square. It was still empty, still unnaturally clean, as if the people who had once walked there had never been born. He clenched his jaw. I saw it. The thing. Whatever it was. It spoke to me. You mean, like, telepathy? Number like being rewritten. It forced a memory into me. Or maybe it was never a memory at all. Maybe it was a warning. Darren was quiet for a long moment. Then, what did it want? Cade stood, cracked his neck. His back screamed in protest. It didn't want anything, he said slowly. It came to finish something. Something it's done before. A low hum came through the comms. Not from Darren. Not from anywhere known. Then silence. Cade froze. Darren, you still with me? The silence stretched. Then a voice, barely audible. Not Darren. It was an old voice. Male, human, strained. This is Commander Alric West, Earth Defense Council. If you're receiving this, you're one of the last... It's not a weapon, not a ship, it's a consequence. The feed cut out again, then static. Cade's eyes narrowed. He knew that name, Alric West, a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in over 3 decades, one of the first human generals to ever serve in the Empire's High Council. He vanished during the Vorn rebellions, presumed dead in a sabotage incident deep in Sector 2. But if this message was real, he was alive, or had been. A consequence. That word stuck in Cade's brain like a splinter. He began walking, away from the plaza, back towards the old comm tower, the one Darren had fortified with analog systems and thick EM shielding. Each step crunched over broken glass and scorched metal, but still, no bodies, not even bones, like they'd been scrubbed out of time. "Cade," Darren's voice returned, this time tighter. "You need to get back here, now." "Why? What happened?" "We just decoded an automated substream. Old Terran, buried under the standard Empire distress protocol. Took me half an hour to strip the encryption." "From who?" "It's signed Project Ashwinter. Ring any bells?" Cade stopped walking. His pulse spiked. That name hadn't been spoken in nearly 20 years. It was buried so deep under Empire intelligence layers that even whispering it near a terminal used to trigger review. But he remembered it. Ashwinter wasn't a project. It was a punishment. The last time Earth had tried to rebel outright, the Empire responded by launching Ashwinter, an initiative that aimed to reduce entire colonies to psychological null zones, not through bombs or viruses, but through absence. "Send me the file," Cade muttered. A blink later, it hit his visor. "Secure file. Ashwinter Prime. Do not decrypt in linked network. Subject, Observation Class Entity Designation, null form. Date, 76 years prior. Entity appears not to move through space, but through memory layers. Contact initiates timeline degradation. Primary trait, unrecordable observation. A civilization becomes aware of it and begins to forget itself. Target civilizations are not destroyed through violence, but erased through recursive non-existence." Initial traces date back millennia. Cultures report similar descriptions. A black void, a silent watcher, arrival followed by vanishing, then collapse of societal memory. Artifact records break. Family trees sever. Collective identity fades. In one case, a species reportedly woke up in ruins with no recollection of ever being an empire. It does not kill. It unhappens. Note: Earth was flagged as incompatible with null-form sequence due to excessive emotional fragmentation and generational trauma markers. Status: terminated under order of Imperial decree. Do not engage. Cade's mouth was dry. "We were immune," he whispered. Darren's voice returned. "What? Earth. Humans. We were immune to it. Not because we're strong, not because we're smart, because we're too broken." "Come again?" Cade clenched his fists. "It doesn't erase by force. It erases by detachment, by making people forget what they were. It thrives on unity, on order, on systems that believe in their own permanence. That's why the Empire crumbled." He turned slowly, scanning the horizon. The cities, the mountains, the ruins of something far bigger than just buildings. "But humans," he continued, "we've never agreed on anything. We've fought each other more than any alien race ever could. We survive not because we remember, but because we can't forget. Our pain is our anchor, our scars. They hold us together." Darren was silent. Then, in a softer voice, "Then why are we still here, Cade?" Cade looked back at the empty plaza. "Because this thing doesn't destroy survivors," he said. "It uses them." The voice had said it clearly. "Because you bleed honestly." That wasn't mercy. That was recognition. Cade began to run now. Full sprint. Past melted towers, past empty homes. Every step hammered into the dead world around him until he reached the steel doors of the comm tower and slammed a fist on the manual unlock panel. The doors hissed open and Darren stood there, pale, sweating, eyes bloodshot. "You saw it too," Cade muttered. Darren nodded slowly. "Not like you did. But I had a dream. No, a memory that doesn't belong to me. My mother died when I was 8. Now I remember her dying twice, once on Earth, once in a city I've never been to." "They're bleeding history into us," Cade said. Or maybe stitching other histories through us. He stepped inside and slammed the doors shut. The interior was dark, covered in cables, manual switches, and paper logs, the kind of analog hell that only old Terran bases had ever loved. "So now what?" Darren asked, gripping the back of a chair. "Do we hide? Wait for it to pass?" Cade didn't answer. He walked to the edge of the room, to an old tactical display. It still showed the star map of Empire space. Dozens of sectors, hundreds of systems, most blinking red, a few already blacked out. "We don't hide," he said at last. "We don't wait." He turned, eyes hard. "We find out what this thing wants, and we give it something it's never had before." Darren frowned. "Which is?" Cade picked up a rusted Earth defense beacon from the storage rack, slapped in a fusion cell. The lights flickered to life. A fight. It was strange, preparing for war against something you couldn't aim at. Cade had fought for 50 years, against insectoid swarms, artificial rebellions, rogue AI cults, void-born parasites. Everything the galaxy could throw at a man, it had thrown. And every time he'd stood up again, bleeding and bitter, but breathing. But now? Now he was preparing to fight something that didn't exist in the traditional sense. The void entity, the null form, as Project Ashwinter called it, wasn't a threat that could be outgunned or outflanked. It didn't use soldiers, didn't burn cities. It simply observed, and by doing so, unwrote what it saw. And somehow Earth had survived that gaze. Darren stood behind Cade, watching silently as he loaded a pulse core into the old Terran beacon. The room smelled of ozone and burning plastic, a byproduct of keeping analog systems alive in a world built for synthetic control. Every screen in the comm tower was dead except one, a flickering 3D map of known space filled with red blinking sectors, showing the collapse of the Empire in real time. Sector 14, gone. Sector 3, silent. Sector 19, broadcasting gibberish, coordinates that led nowhere, emergency codes from species long extinct. Cade stabbed a wire into the map's core socket, causing the image to flicker, then expand. "Here," he muttered, pointing. Darren leaned in. "What is that?" "Old Earth Defense Outpost, pre-Empire, deep in neutral space, just past the edge of the Ura dust line. Was used for research on Ashwinter before the Empire shut it down. Most don't even know it still exists." "You think they knew more than what was in the report?" "I'd bet blood on it." Darren frowned. "And you think someone's still alive there?" "No," Cade said grimly. "But something might be. Logs, data, warnings we never listened to. And if we're going to fight this thing, I want to know exactly what triggered it." Darren leaned against the table, rubbing his temples. "Do you think we triggered it?" Cade didn't answer right away. His silence was enough. The Empire's arrogance had spanned millennia. They thought their unity was divine. Thought control was progress. They saw humans as chaotic, fragmented, flawed. But maybe that flaw had been the reason the Empire fell, and Earth stood. He turned toward the launch bay inside the tower. Dust-coated jumpsuits, rusted exopacks, a single short-range cruiser still functional under manual controls. It had no AI, no hyperlink. It was like flying blind with a brick strapped to a nuke. But it would do. "We take the ship," Cade said. "We head to the Ashwinter outpost. We find out what this thing really is, or at least what it wants. And then—" "What?" Darren asked. "We beg it to spare us?" "No," Cade said, voice low and cold. "We find a way to hurt it." Darren laughed once, bitter. "You're out of your mind." Cade looked over. "That's why I'm still alive." They launched at dawn, or what passed for dawn on Thesser 9. The cruiser stuttered at first, like it hadn't been awake in decades, But eventually the engines held. The skies were empty. No patrols, no Empire drones. Just silence. They punched through atmosphere and into space within an hour. The moment they hit orbit, Darren called out, "Visual on debris field. Massive!" Cade stepped to the viewport. Outside, floating above Thessar 9, was what remained of the 7th Imperial Armada. Or at least what used to be it. Hundreds of ships, from corvettes to supercarriers, all frozen in disarray, not destroyed, not burned, just abandoned. Lights still blinking, engines still primed, no bodies. Cade stared in silence. It didn't even consider them worth erasing. Darren nodded grimly, like swatting flies and forgetting they existed. They passed the debris without interference, then punched their route manually through uncharted space. It would take them 3 days on the cruiser's sublight engines, an eternity in a galaxy used to warp travel. But speed meant exposure, and Cade didn't want to be seen. The first night, Cade didn't sleep. He sat near the nav console, drinking stale water, staring at old holographs pulled from the ship's archive. Pre-Empire Earth. Images of smoking cities, protests, war, ruins and revolutions. And yet through all the pain, something constant, a face in every crowd. Defiance, rage, identity. Humans didn't forget who they were, even when they wanted to. That's what made them dangerous. The second night, Darren joined him. "You ever wonder," he asked, "if this is what we were always heading toward?" Cade looked over. "What do you mean?" Darren leaned back. "I mean, this thing, this null form, it's not a villain. It's not an invader. It's a force. It shows up when civilizations get too big, too perfect, when they lose the reason they started building in the first place." Cade didn't respond. Darren went on, voice quieter now. "Maybe this is how the universe balances itself. Maybe there's no peace to be found in unity, only erasure." Cade tapped the side of his helmet. "Then let it come. I'm not looking for peace. I'm looking for a reason to pull the trigger." They arrived at the Ashwinter outpost on the 3rd day. It was a jagged rock orbiting a dead sun. No atmosphere, no movement, just an old black station bolted to the crust like a scar. It had no beacon, no lights. But when their ship approached, an old Earth command signal blinked green. Recognition code accepted. "Son of a bitch," Cade muttered. "They never shut it down." They docked, entered through the outer ring. No security, no defenses, just dust and silence and the creaking groan of something ancient still trying to live. Inside, it was colder than space. Generators were offline. Only one hallway had emergency power. They followed it. At the end, behind 2 rusted bulkheads, they found it. A man. Or what had once been one. He was sitting in a chair, skin mummified, bones frozen in place. A tattered Earth defense uniform hung from his frame. His face was shriveled, mouth open, eyes long dried out. But in his lap, clutched in bony hands, was a drive. Darren stepped forward and took it. "No," Cade said. "Let me." He pried the drive loose. It was warm, warm. "That shouldn't be possible," Darren muttered. "Power's dead." Cade connected it to a handheld reader. A hologram blinked to life. Alric West, younger, fierce, voice steady. "If you're watching this, Earth still stands. That means you've seen the ship, and you're asking the same question I asked 50 years ago. What is it?" "It's not one thing. It's the collective echo of 1,000 dead civilizations. They didn't die. They were consumed by their own reflection. This entity doesn't destroy, it mirrors. And when a species stares into that mirror long enough, it forgets how it started. They forget hunger, pain, grit. They forget how to bleed. That's when the null form arrives, to finish what pride began. But humans? We never forget pain. We build homes out of trauma. We stitch our history from ashes. That's why we survive. Not because we're strong, but because we're ugly enough to remember. Cade stared at the flickering image. Alric was speaking directly into the soul of what humanity was. You want to kill it? You can't, but you can fight it. You can remind the galaxy what pain looks like, what blood feels like. You carry that with you. That's your gift. That's your weapon. You don't beat the void by hiding from it. You face it, and you bleed honestly. The feed cut. Silence. Cade exhaled, chest tight. We don't run, he said. Darren nodded slowly. We show it we still remember. Cade turned back toward the ship. Prep the broadcast array. We're going live. Going live to what? Cade's eyes burned with fire. To everything. What's left of the Empire? Dead systems, scattered humans, the whole galaxy. And say what? He stopped in the doorway. We say, the void came for us, and we're still here. The broadcast array groaned like an old god being forced out of sleep. Cade stood in the control chamber of the Ashwinter outpost, staring at panels that hadn't seen light in over 50 years. Darren worked beside him, fingers flying across a cracked keyboard, coaxing ancient Terran tech back to life without alerting whatever ghost systems the Empire might have left behind. No uplinks, no AI, no synthetic stabilizers, just two men and a dying signal line that might still carry a voice across the stars. This signal's not going to last more than a few minutes, Darren muttered. The fusion battery's bleeding out. Maybe one jump relay before it fries. That's enough, Cade said, tightening the straps of his ragged armor. We just need one ear. One ear's not going to stop what's coming. Cade looked up, eyes hard. It's not about stopping it, it's about challenging it. He stepped forward and flipped the switch on the recording mic. A red light blinked. Live. His voice was coarse at first, rusty from hours of silence and recycled air, but it carried weight, it carried truth. This is Commander Cade Mercer of the Earthborn Shock Legion, he said low and steady. If you're hearing this, you're either hiding, dying, or you're like me, too damn stubborn to quit. He paused. No script, no plan, just the words crawling up from deep inside his bones. You've seen the black sky. You've watched cities disappear. You've felt the world forget itself while you're still standing in it. I know. I've been there, and now you want answers. You want to know what the hell that ship was, why it looked at us and blinked us out like we were smudges on glass. He leaned closer, the static crackling around his words. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a fleet. It was a reckoning, a consequence for pretending we were gods. The red light blinked faster. Time running out. But here's the thing, he said, voice rising. It didn't finish the job. It blinked and we were still here. Earth still breathes. Humans still bleed. And that thing? That void? That null form? It doesn't know what to do with that. Cade slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the mic. Because we don't forget. We don't dissolve into order and peace. We remember every betrayal, every lost name, every scar etched into our skin. We were never meant to be part of the Empire. We were the thorn they tolerated, not the jewel they prized. But now? He paused, letting the air settle like ash. Now we're all that's left. Darren glanced up, nodding once. Cade leaned in again. If you're a soldier, find a weapon. If you're a tech, find a signal. If you're breathing, then damn it, fight. I don't care if the enemy is made of silence and shadow. I don't care if it wipes out our names. It looked at us and moved on. That means we matter. That means we're the problem. A final beep echoed. Signal fading. Let's make sure it remembers why. The mic went dead. The red light stopped blinking. Silence returned. Cade stepped back and exhaled. The whole outpost seemed to creak in approval or warning. Darren stood slowly. You think anyone heard it? Cade didn't answer. He stared at the floor, eyes scanning lines of cracked tile, as if listening for something older than sound. Yeah, he said at last. I think something did. They left the broadcast room and sealed it behind them. There was no second transmission, no backup signal. Either that one message lit a spark across the surviving corners of the galaxy, or it vanished like everything else. But something had changed. The moment they stepped back aboard the cruiser, the sky outside shifted. Cade? Darren said, pointing to the viewport. That's not normal. Above the dead sun, where nothing should have been, the stars began to flicker. Not like distant lights, but like pixels on a broken screen. One by one, constellations twisted. The sky warped. The shape had returned. Not directly above them, not on the planet, but just beyond perception. Like it was pacing. I think we got its attention, Darren whispered. Cade grabbed the control stick. Then let's make sure we hold it. They fired the engines and left the outpost behind. Fast, hard. Straight toward open space. Not back to Thesser 9. Not to Earth. Cade had something else in mind. What are you doing? Darren asked. Heading to a graveyard. He pulled up old coordinates, hidden Earthborn sanctums, pre-Empire war zones long since declared off-limits. The place where rebellion bled into legend. A place where human soldiers had been left to rot because their loyalty wasn't to the Council, but to each other. Valkyr's Rim. It was a hell world orbiting a decaying star. No resources, no life. Just a cluster of broken ships and buried secrets. But it was also the last known location of the Cradle. A myth among old Terran ranks. The Cradle wasn't a weapon. It was a code vault. A black box storing the darkest fragments of humanity's war record. Strategies banned by the Empire, biological triggers, fear viruses, memory collapse protocols, all the things that made humanity too volatile to fully trust. The kind of things that might rattle a god. We're going to awaken something that was never meant to be touched, Darren said. Cade adjusted course. Good. 3 days later, they dropped out of sublight just above the rim. The system was dead. Silent, but the graveyard was still there. Thousands of ships scattered like bones in orbit, all fused together by time and radiation. No lights, no movement. But deep inside the field, one signal pulsed. The Cradle. They slipped through the wreckage, scraping hulls, bouncing off debris. Finally, they reached a long, dead dreadnought split down the middle. Inside it, hidden beneath armor and melted steel, was a single black cube. The Cradle. Darren stared at it. Do we even know how to open it? Cade pulled out the drive from Ashwinter. No, he said, but I know who does. He inserted the drive into the cube's interface. It pulsed red. A low hum began to build in the chamber, vibrating through their boots. Then a voice spoke. Authorization. Earthborn clearance Alpha Tau 7. Memory trigger unlocked. Defense code. Black Sun Initiative. Darren took a step back. Oh hell, that's real. Cade didn't blink. It's all real now. The cube unfolded. Inside it were dozens of small chips, each encoded with history the Empire had tried to erase. Each one a nightmare in data form. One of them pulsed with blue light. Cade picked it up. Its label was burned, but he didn't need to read it. He could feel what it was. Fear. Not information, not logic, not tactics. A raw, weaponized emotion designed to trigger existential dread in any species it touched. Made in the first days of Earth's war with the machine gods of the Arctari Belt. The last time humanity had faced something that didn't understand pain, and made it understand anyway. He looked at Darren. "This thing wants memory," he said. "Let's give it the worst of ours." "You're going to upload that into the void?" "No," Cade said. "I'm going to carry it into its shadow, and let it look into me." The ship shook. The lights flickered. Outside, the stars bent. The shape had arrived. Closer now. Watching. Waiting. Cade clenched the chip in his fist and walked to the viewport. "Come on then," he muttered. "Let's see if gods can be afraid." The stars had stopped moving. From the cockpit of the stolen cruiser, Cade watched as the galaxy seemed to pause. No spin, no drift, no pull. Time itself felt like it had stepped out of the room and closed the door behind it. The void had arrived. It didn't scream into orbit. It didn't roar. It simply was, hanging above Valkyr's rim like a second sky, larger than anything natural, its surface pulsing with inverted light. It wasn't black. Black was absence. This was inversion, like it rejected the idea of color, of matter, of presence itself. And yet it saw him. He felt it again, that unbearable awareness pressing into his chest, a gaze so immense it crushed everything you thought was real. Darren stood beside him, pale and shaking. "It's here." Cade didn't reply. He just stared. In his hand was the chip, fear, encoded in raw, emotional data, more than just terror. This wasn't a weapon that burned or cut. This was the scream of a mother who lost her child to an orbital strike. The desperation of a soldier holding his intestines in after a pulse bomb went off. The silence of a dying child who knew no one would come. This was the worst of humanity, wrapped in memory, soaked in history, preserved as a virus. He hadn't loaded it yet. Once he did, the broadcast would reach every nearby receptive signal, the entity included. If it could be reached, if it even had something like memory. "Cade," Darren said again, now clutching the side of the console. "If we do this, we don't know what it'll do. It could erase this entire sector in a blink." Cade turned, eyes bloodshot, voice low. "And if we don't? It erases everything slowly, thoughtfully, like we never mattered." He slotted the chip into the interface. The ship's systems flickered, then rebooted in silent mode. Emotions, not logic, flowing through the circuits. Earth's darkest invention had never been authorized for use, even during the final rebellions. That had changed. The air grew thick, like the ship itself knew what it was carrying. "Cade." Darren backed away, voice dry. "It's reacting." The shape outside twisted. The angles broke. One corner of the void folded inward, exposing something underneath. Not physical, not visible in the traditional sense, but alive. It looked like a wound in space, a wound that was bleeding memory. And in that instant, Cade saw too much. Thousands of civilizations blinking out, not through war, but through abandonment. Cities with no names, planets where no child was ever born, empires that never learned from pain. The void didn't kill them. It made them forget why to exist at all. That's what the null form was. A mirror. And civilizations that loved their own reflection too much. They dissolved into it. But humanity had never loved itself. It fought, it fractured, it hated. It remembered every sin, and Cade was about to weaponize that hatred. He pressed the final sequence. The chip activated. A silent signal pulsed, carrying not data, not words, but pain. He didn't transmit it through words. He broadcast himself. The chip flooded his neural link. His spine arched. Every old wound lit up like it was fresh. He saw old battles again, his friends screaming beside him in the trenches of Eridus 7, the day he watched an entire civilian convoy get melted by the Empire for loyalty confusion, the time he shot a child because she'd been rigged with proximity mines by a dying resistance group. And then, his worst moment, His brother, captured, tortured, reprogrammed by Imperial Black Ops. Cade had to kill him with a knife. No gun, no mercy. The chip relived it all, through him, and sent that agony screaming into the void. The sky rippled. The ship shook. "Cade!" Darren screamed, grabbing him as he convulsed. "Kill the signal!" But Cade didn't stop. The pain was flowing now, not out of him, but into the thing above. The shape in the sky began to buckle. Its geometry wavered. And for the first time, Cade heard something new. A sound. Not speech, not data, a moan. Deep, low, as if space itself had been stabbed and didn't understand what pain was. The wound in the sky opened wider. Cade collapsed to his knees, nose bleeding, jaw clenched. He was barely conscious when he saw it. A figure stepping out of the void. Not a machine, not a god, something that looked almost human, but cracked, stretched, warped by time. It had no face, just a skull of mirrored glass, its surface rippling with every scream Cade had ever buried. It stepped onto the hull of their ship, ignoring physics, ignoring matter. It came for him. Darren backed away in raw panic, shouting into the void, firing his pistol in blind instinct. The shots passed through the creature like mist. It walked to the viewport, pressed a mirrored palm against it, and time stopped. Literally, the lights froze. Darren's body hung mid-motion, suspended like a photograph. Only Cade could move. And in his mind, a voice, not like before, raw, confused. "Why do you scream?" Cade forced himself to stand. He staggered towards the viewport, face inches from the figure's reflection. "Because I remember." "They did not. I'm not them. You carry grief. I carry humanity." The figure tilted its head, glass face flickering with thousands of faces, flickering like broken channels. "You survived through agony." Cade pressed his bloody hand to the viewport in return. "That's what makes us real." The creature's reflection twisted again. Now it showed Cade himself, as a boy, then as a soldier, then as a man covered in blood, then as nothing. The mirrored image faded. "You hurt me." Cade grinned, blood on his teeth. "Good." The creature stepped back. Time resumed. Darren collapsed, gasping. The lights blinked. The sky shifted. The wound closed. The shape retreated. Not vanished, just pulled away. For the first time in known history, the null form withdrew. Not because it was beaten, but because it had felt something it never had before. Pain. Cade collapsed beside the console. Darren dragged himself toward him. "You alive?" he gasped. Cade nodded weakly. "More than ever." "What? What just happened?" Cade stared out the window. It saw us, really saw us, and for the first time, it didn't know what to do. Darren leaned against the wall, staring at the stars returning to normal. "So, what now?" Cade looked at the cradle's still glowing chip. "Now we make sure it never forgets us." The signal hit the stars like a pulse of raw nerve. In the days after Cade's broadcast and the confrontation with the null form, something began to stir across the remnants of the Empire. Not immediately, not loudly, but deeply, like a great heart starting to beat again after a long, cold stillness. In forgotten bunkers, on derelict warships, in quiet corners of dead worlds where human outposts had long since gone silent, the message replayed. "If you're breathing, then damn it, fight." For the first time in a generation, humans started answering. It began with flickers, a rogue transmission from the Ferris Belt, where Earthborn miners had hidden from the Empire's forced relocations decades ago. Then a garbled voice in the decaying orbit of the Helios Gate, a coded reply from the depths of Venera 3's collapsed underground rail lines, where deserters had become myth. The Empire had called them fractured, disloyal, dangerous. Now those same forgotten fighters were waking up, remembering who they were and who had made them disappear. They didn't believe in unity, they believed in vengeance, and Cade had given them a reason to remember. Inside the cruiser, patched into the cradle's manual systems, Darren tracked the signals one by one. 17 confirmed pings, he said, tapping the crude console. Old Earthborn tags. Some of them. Cade, some of these are from legions that were wiped out during the Empire's pacification campaigns, supposedly extinct. Cade sat hunched near the viewport, still pale from the overload. His body hadn't recovered from the confrontation with the Null form. The pain broadcast had aged him 10 years in minutes. His eyes were sunken, his movements stiff. But his mind was sharper than ever. They went dark because the Empire erased their history, he muttered. Not because they died. We're not easy to kill. Darren nodded. These people are angry. Good, Cade said. We're going to need that. Outside, the Rim graveyard remained still. The void hadn't returned. Not yet. But Cade could feel it watching, not just hovering anymore, studying. The chip was still embedded in the ship's systems. Not broadcasting anymore, but still active, still warm. Like it had imprinted itself on the ship's core, changing something subtle in the way the sensors read the space around them. Cade had touched the mind of the Null form, and it had touched his. He felt things now he shouldn't, heard echoes, flashes, moments not his own, distant cries, civilizations dying in silence, and something deeper, curiosity. He knew it now. The void wasn't just a destroyer, it was a learner. It had never been hurt before, never been shown real fear, not the kind that came from emotion, but from memory. And now it was adapting. What if this backfires? Darren asked quietly. What if all we've done is teach it how to erase us better? Cade stood slowly. Every joint creaked. Then we make it regret learning. The console pinged again. Darren glanced down. New signal, stronger. This one's different. Cade stepped over, scanning the output. A sharp, rhythmic code. It wasn't military, it was ritual, a blood flag, used only once in Terran history, by survivors of the Rainscar massacre, when an entire battalion was abandoned by the Empire and fought off a biological siege for 6 years alone. They'd encoded their last message in a blood flag, one final scream into the void. This signal matched that structure. Play it, Cade said. The transmission began, distorted but clear. This is Lieutenant Ren Varro, Earthborn Division 13. We received your message. Sector 24 is lost. Half our people don't remember where they were born. The other half don't care. But we do. We remember pain. We remember what it cost to be forgotten. A pause. You bled honestly. We will too. Another ping followed seconds later, then another, and another. The console filled with call signs, squads that didn't exist in the Empire's history books, names that had been stricken from records, soldiers who weren't supposed to remember who they were, and they were all saying the same thing. We remember. Darren sat down slowly, exhaling. You started a war. Cade stared at the blinking console, jaw tight. Number I resurrected one. He turned towards the nav system. Prep jump coordinates. Earth. Darren's head snapped up. Are you insane? We need to get there before the Null form does. The Empire buried more than just our history on that planet. They buried weapons, knowledge, data too dangerous to keep accessible. You think Earth will still be standing after this? If it's not, it's still home. He didn't wait for debate. He locked in coordinates. As the ship prepped for jump, something strange happened. Every system went dark. Not violently, just like a breath being held. Darren stood. Cade? Then the console flickered. A single message appeared on screen. Not from any relay, not from any faction. Just a line of text that should have been impossible. I saw you. Cade stared. The ship vibrated. Not physically, internally. He could feel the null form again. Not in space, but in his mind. Not attacking, not deleting, mimicking. "It's trying to think like us," he whispered. Darren stepped back. "Then we've infected it." "No," Cade said darkly. "We've awakened it." The ship's systems returned to life. Jump drive lit up. They launched. The stars bent. The rim graveyard vanished. And in the deep, somewhere beyond light, the void shifted. Inside its impossible geometry, it held a new shape now. A memory. A shape that looked like Cade. They dropped out of sublight 2 systems short of Earth. Not by choice. Something dragged them out. No alarms, no impact, just a sudden stop. Cade grabbed the control stick. "Report?" Darren stared at the external feed. "Cade, this is bad." Outside, the stars were gone. Not covered. Gone. In their place, reflections. Dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of Cade's last broadcast playing across space, like echoes on mirrors, each one slightly different. In one, Cade screamed. In another, he wept. In another, he bled from the eyes as he raised his rifle. The void was replaying him, studying his rage, learning his pain, feeding on it, and shaping it. "Cade," Darren said, voice cracking, "it's not trying to erase us anymore, it's trying to become us." Cade felt cold all over. He stepped to the window. One of the mirrored echoes turned its head and looked directly at him, not through the screen. At him, and it smiled. Cade whispered, "It learned fear." Darren replied, voice barely audible, "And now it wants to know what comes after." Cade stared into his own face, reflected across the void, warped and multiplied, replaying like a corrupted memory loop in a broken mind. Each version of him, each echo, played out something different. One screamed in helpless fury, rifle shaking in his hands. One dropped to his knees, sobbing with blood dripping from his eyes. One stood, calm and grim, whispering words Cade could no longer hear, but knew by heart. And one just smiled. The same crooked, defiant grin Cade wore when he'd first challenged the void. It wasn't just mirroring him. It was learning to feel him. "What is this?" Darren whispered, transfixed by the impossible theater outside their viewport. "This isn't a ship. This isn't war. It's an infection of thought." "No," Cade muttered, voice hard. "It's imitation. Pure mimicry. The thing doesn't destroy like we do. It unbuilds. But now it's realized the one thing we have that it doesn't." He turned to Darren. Consequence. The void hadn't killed civilizations by burning them. It had watched them erase themselves, bored of repetition, weary of their own perfection. It reflected their godlike pride back at them, let them see the futility in eternal stability, then waited for the rest to collapse. But humanity had always been different. We fought because we were broken. We survived because we refused to forget our wounds. And now the void wanted that too. The flickering shapes outside began to converge, bleeding into one larger mass. A figure began to form, taller than any known species, broad-shouldered, long-limbed, the outline of a soldier. A man. But not quite. Its face shifted. Not flesh, not metal, something in between, and its mouth never moved, but Cade still heard it inside his skull. "I understand now." Darren gripped the console. "It's using your memories to build identity." Cade nodded, slow and steady. "It's becoming something else. Fear is not weakness. Pain is not decay. They are structure." The figure stepped forward across the stars. No movement. Just presence. "You endured. I did not account for memory that resists deletion." Cade stepped to the viewport, face inches from the swirling void. Because we wear our pain, every day. You made us remember it louder. The figure flickered, glitching between Cade's image and something new. A face that wasn't his, but could have been. The first version of something trying to be human. I want to understand more. That's not how this works, Cade said. Chook, show me. Let me feel everything. No. The void paused. You fear what I may become. Cade stepped away from the viewport. No, he said. I fear what I might become if I let you in. The ship shook. Suddenly, hundreds of signals burst across the system. Darren turned, eyes wide. Cade, every Earthborn signal just lit up. They heard us. They're coming. He looked at the radar. Dozens of ships, small and crude, patched together from ruins, relics of Earth's abandoned children. None of them carried fleet AI. None of them had wormhole tech. These were hand-forged weapons of desperation, and they were charging in. To die, maybe, but to die loudly. They're broadcasting something, Darren said, tapping a feed. Old Earthborn war code, a single line. He played it aloud. It echoed inside the cabin like thunder in a tomb. You looked into us. Now look into our wrath. Cade closed his eyes and smiled. The void, in response, shifted again. Its figure opened its arms, not in threat, in invitation. Then give it to me. Darren turned to Cade. We can overload the chip, feed the Cradle's entire fear archive into it, everything the Empire tried to forget, every rebellion, atrocity, genocide. If this thing wants pain, let's drown it. Cade nodded. Do it. The Cradle began to hum. One by one, the data wafers activated, history uncoiled, screams encoded in soundless files, blood-written memories, the whispered last words of soldiers who died abandoned in vacuum, all of it pumped into the chip. The ship groaned under the weight of it, hull shaking, systems dimming. Cade stepped into the central core, and once again he broadcast himself. Not just one moment this time, all of it. He opened the floodgates of human suffering. His spine arched, vision blurred. But he didn't scream. He remembered. He remembered the child he couldn't save, the men he left behind, the orders he followed that cost a city. He remembered being called subhuman by the Empire for being born on Earth. And he pushed it out, into the sky, into the thing that wanted to become like them. The void figure convulsed. Its mirrored face cracked. It screamed, a real scream, ragged, low, trembling with something alien. Emotion. The Earthborn fleet fired. Crude projectiles, magnetic warheads, makeshift nukes. None of it would kill the thing. But it hurt it. And that's what mattered. Cade kept feeding the archive, pushing his memories into the void. He felt it push back. This pain, it burns. That's what makes it real, Cade hissed through clenched teeth. Why would you carry this? Cade bared his teeth. Because it's the only thing we've ever owned that no one could steal. The light grew brighter. The screams got louder. The creature's body began to break down, each layer of its imitation self peeling apart under the weight of emotion. Not just fear. Guilt. Regret. Love twisted into rage, things it had never known. Cade fell to his knees, his pulse dropped, blood streamed from his nose and ears, the console burned, the ship began to fall apart. Darren shouted behind him, Cade, we need to go! This ship can't take it! But Cade stayed on his knees, because something was happening. The figure wasn't just breaking, it was cracking open like a shell, and from the center of it, something small emerged. A spark. Not light, not matter, just remembrance. The core of the entity, the real one, had been watching itself through 1,000 civilizations, repeating the same cycle for eons. It hadn't been an executioner. It had been a slave to its own pattern, and Cade had broken the mirror. "You showed me death," the core whispered in his mind. Cade coughed blood, forcing himself to speak. "Number I showed you life that won't forget death. There's a difference." The core flickered. Then it left. No sound, no flash, just absence. The mirrors vanished. The shape dissolved. The void withdrew into itself and disappeared. Cade collapsed. Silence fell. The Earthborn fleet floated above him. Fires flickered on half their hulls. Makeshift weapons melted or jammed. No celebration, no cheers, just breathing. And that was enough. Cade woke up 2 weeks later in a field hospital on a reclaimed Earthborn outpost. His right arm didn't work. His left eye was gone. His spine would never fully heal. But he was alive. Darren sat beside him, holding a datapad. "It's gone," he said. Cade nodded. "And?" Darren hesitated. "It left something. A data imprint. Not dangerous, just a shape. A name. They called it First Memory." Cade looked at the ceiling. The stars above were real again. "Then it understood." Darren looked over. "What now?" Cade turned his head, slowly, painfully. "Now we teach the galaxy what happens when you try to erase people who remember how to bleed." He sat up, one vertebra at a time. "I'm not done yet." The air stank of blood and oil. Not Earth's oil. No, the synthetic fuel that powered the Exalor machines. Thick and bitter with a tang that stuck to the back of your throat. Sergeant Blake Riker crouched behind a collapsed corridor wall, cradling a smoking rifle that was 2 shots from overheating. The station had gone silent 3 minutes ago, which meant the last of his squad was either dead or dying. And now it was just him, breathing heavy, ears ringing, watching for the shimmer that marked an Exalor cloaking unit. They'd come out of nowhere. No declaration, no warning. Just orbital fire that ripped holes into cities and vaporized governments. Earth had scrambled to respond. But what could a fractured species do against an empire that spanned galaxies? The answer, it turned out, was simple. Bleed. Bleed and scream and bite back. Blake hadn't planned to be a symbol. He wasn't a commander, wasn't a tactician. He fixed comm units and shot straight. But when the Exalor slaughtered his brothers in arms like they were vermin, when they laughed in that clicking dialect and tore his friend Mason's jaw clean off, it flipped something in him. Something primal. Something that didn't give a damn about odds or alien superiority. He'd stolen their tech. He learned how their cloaking worked, how their shields cycled every 12 seconds, even how their elite warriors felt pain, intense, paralyzing pain when their spine joints were targeted. And one by one he picked them off. Not cleanly, not honorably, but efficiently. Tonight, though, something had changed. Command had gone dark, and this Exalor vessel, deep in Earth's orbit, wasn't part of a standard assault unit. No, this was something else. Bigger, more dangerous. The walls hummed with life. The tech was newer, sleeker, and whatever they were hiding in the central chamber, it wasn't meant for humans to see. But Blake had seen it, or rather, heard it. As he crawled past a vent shaft 2 hours ago, he caught pieces of their language, filtered and translated through the cracked Exalor comm implant he'd embedded behind his ear. A weapon. No, not a weapon. Something worse. A reset device. A planetary purifier. They were going to erase Earth. Start over. Blake gritted his teeth. His body ached. His ribs were bruised, maybe fractured. His arm was burned where an Exalor plasma whip had nearly split his bicep in 2. But none of it mattered now. If he could get to that chamber, plant the last charge he had left, it wouldn't stop the Empire, but it would send a message, one they'd never forget. He moved silently, sliding under piping and dodging motion scanners. His breath was steady, his pulse controlled. He didn't have anything left to lose, not since Chicago fell, not since his sister's voice cut off mid-transmission. He pressed his back to a vent hatch, listening. The room beyond crackled with static. Alien voices clicked and buzzed. And then, silence. He kicked the panel open and rolled inside, rifle aimed, finger on the trigger. 5 Exilor stared at him. They didn't raise weapons. They didn't scream. They just laughed. And one of them, taller, heavier armored, eyes like polished obsidian, stepped forward. "You speak our tongue," it said, voice distorted but clear through the implant. Blake didn't blink. "I do. You are alone, dying. I've been dying since your ships showed up. You came to destroy our purifier. You were too late." Blake smiled, slow and dangerous. "Number I came to give you an answer." He pulled a trigger, not on his rifle, but the detonator in his palm. The room exploded, not with fire, not with smoke, but with EMP, pure, ripping static that shut down every system, including the one powering the purifier. As alarms blared and Exilor scrambled, Blake limped to the core. He placed the real charge, old Earth tech, unstable but lethal. He stared into the mainframe's cold blue light and muttered, "You want war? You got it." And he pressed the final button. The blast didn't kill him. That was the first mistake they made, assuming a human wouldn't go down swinging with a backup plan stitched into his blood and bone. Blake Riker hit the ground hard when the charge went off, the pressure knocking the air from his lungs like a steel punch to the chest. For a moment, everything blurred. Light, pain, gravity twisting sideways. And then it snapped back. Fire burned in his throat. His skin stung with static, every hair on his body standing like live wires, but he was alive. More importantly, they weren't. The purifier's core had gone dark. No hum, no resonance, just silence. And silence meant failure, on their part. He forced himself up, coughing through the smoke. 3 Exilor lay slumped nearby, twitching. The EMP had fried their internal symbiotics. Whatever nanotech they relied on to regulate pain, to heal, to fight, it was dead. Blake walked up to one of them, its armor cracked from the blast, and stared into its glossy black eyes. "Still breathing?" he muttered. The Exilor gurgled something in its native tongue, probably a curse. Blake didn't care. He raised his boot and crushed its throat. Efficient, brutal, no hesitation. He didn't have the luxury of mercy anymore, not after what they'd done, not after Mason, not after Lisa, not after Earth. The walls of the chamber flickered as emergency lights kicked in. Red, stuttering beams that made everything look soaked in blood. He knew it was only a matter of time before reinforcements arrived. This wasn't a raiding party. This ship was a node in their empire's spinal cord. If Blake had managed to shut down even a part of that system, they'd respond. Fast, with force, and he wasn't ready to die. Not yet. He pulled a blade from one of the fallen Exilor, curved, made of some obsidian-like metal that vibrated faintly when touched. Their weapons were personal, crafted to their biology. Holding one felt wrong, like gripping a serpent's fang. But he needed something quiet now, something that didn't overheat or scream in plasma bursts. He moved fast, navigating through the smoking corridors, his boots crunching broken panels and charred bone. The ship was bigger than any Earthborn design. Vaulted ceilings, endless halls, strange architecture that ignored symmetry. Alien minds didn't think like humans. They built in loops and organic shapes. Blake had memorized some of it from stolen schematics, but most of this he was winging, and winging had kept him alive so far. He tapped his comm unit, praying it still functioned. Static, a hiss, then a faint voice. "Riker, do you copy? Static. Pullout failed." His heart jumped. That voice. Captain Darrow, that old bastard had survived. Blake adjusted the frequency. This is Riker. I've disabled the purifier. I repeat, the weapon is offline. Status? Static, then. Barely got out of the LZ, 2 dropships destroyed. We're scattering. You're alone in there, son. Blake clenched his jaw. I know. You have an exfil plan? Number, but I've got something better. Silence on the other end. Then, what? They think I'm dead. That's when the alarms changed pitch. Shrill, wailing, a call to arms. Blake smiled grimly. Guess they just found the core. He broke into a run. He couldn't just leave. Destroying 1 purifier wasn't enough. They had thousands. This was a message, but it had to be loud. Deafening. He needed data, coordinates, blueprints, something that Earth could use to fight back. If this ship had 1 purifier, it probably had schematics to all the others. This was the chance of a lifetime. If he could survive it. He ducked into an auxiliary data chamber. Smaller than the core. Quieter. He'd hacked Exilor interfaces before. They used neural syncing, which meant pain was the key. You had to let their tech bite you. Literally. He jammed the stolen blade into a socket. The panel hissed open. Tendrils lashed out, needle-thin wires grabbing his wrist, burrowing into his skin. Blake didn't flinch. Pain surged. His brain screamed. His vision whitewashed. But then the flood began. Data, raw and alien, pouring into his mind. Locations, ship specs, weaknesses. The Exilor weren't invincible. They had cracks, faults. And Earth. Earth could exploit them. He yanked back, blood running down his arm. The panel went dark. Data secured. Footsteps echoed. Heavy, measured. Not like the soldiers. These were elite. He knew that sound. He moved into position, blade tight in hand. The door hissed open. 2 Exilor entered. Sleeker armor, taller frames. Their movements were fluid, almost elegant. They scanned the room. Blake was already behind them. The first one died with a slit throat, its blood spraying hot and black. The second turned, roaring, and Blake lunged, ramming the blade through its eye. It fell with a thud. He didn't pause. Every second was a gift. Blake ran. He was heading for the fighter bay. Not to escape. Yet. First, he needed to upload the data. Earth had relay beacons scattered in the upper stratosphere, cloaked but interceptable. If he could get to one of the Exilor's long-range comm units, patch into it, bounce the signal to the nearest Earth beacon, it'd be enough. He reached the bay. Empty. Too quiet. A trap? Didn't matter. He found the terminal, wired in the data node. Started the upload. 15%. He counted every breath, every blink. 32%. A whir behind him. He turned. Too late. An armored fist slammed into his chest, lifting him off the ground and slamming him into a console. Pain exploded through his ribs. He gasped, vision swimming. The Exilor commander stood over him, massive, plated in dark crimson armor. "You are persistent," it said. Blake spat blood. "You started this war. I'm just replying. You are alone. One human. Funny. You keep saying that like it matters." The Exilor tilted its head. "You cannot stop the Empire." Blake grinned, teeth stained red. "I don't need to stop it. I just need to slow it down, so the rest of us can catch up." 75%. The commander lunged. Blake rolled, grabbing the fallen blade. The fight was fast, brutal. Metal clanged, flesh tore. Blake was faster, but weaker, hurt. Every strike cost him more than he could afford. 90%, the commander roared, smashing the console. Too late. Upload complete. Blake pressed the emergency eject button. The node shot into orbit, seeking the Earth beacon. He turned to face the commander, coughing. Blood leaked from his mouth, his side. "You've already lost," Blake said. The Excelor raised a blade, and Blake laughed. Cold. Defiant. You want war? He whispered. And then he pulled the last pin on the last charge tucked into his belt. The bay erupted in fire. Pain. It came first. Sharp, immediate, real. Then heat. Searing everywhere like he was lying in the sun's mouth. Blake Riker woke to a metallic groan above his head and the thick, choking scent of scorched polymer. Every muscle screamed. His ears were ringing so loud they muffled his thoughts. But he was breathing. He was still breathing. He opened his eyes slowly. One of them wouldn't fully cooperate, swollen shut. The other blinked into a haze of black smoke and shifting light. He lay beneath a twisted slab of debris, part of the bay ceiling that had collapsed during the blast. Somehow, it had fallen at just the right angle to shield him from the worst of the explosion. Or maybe the universe wasn't done using him yet. Either way, he was still alive. Blake rolled to his side, gritting his teeth so hard his jaw felt like it might snap. Everything hurt. His side was wet. He didn't have to look to know it was blood. His left arm throbbed with a dull, deep ache. Broken? Maybe. Didn't matter. He had one working arm, one working eye, and his legs still moved. That was all he needed. He crawled out from under the wreckage. The fighter bay was unrecognizable. Fire danced along the walls. Shattered glass and alien steel littered the floor like the remains of some mechanical beast. Smoke rose from the far end, where the fighter launch tubes had been. Nothing was launching from here now. And the Excelor commander? Gone. Blown to hell, or at least crippled enough to not matter anymore. Blake hoped it had been close enough to feel the heat of that charge as it went off. He hoped it had seen Blake's face in those final seconds, but he didn't waste time wondering. He limped to the bay's access terminal, only half expecting it to respond. The screen flickered, glitching through Excelor symbols, then stabilized. He tapped into the internal schematics. A miracle. The data upload had finished. The node was gone. Out in orbit. If Earth's relay caught it, then everything he fought for, bled for, was worth it. But now came the hard part. Getting out. This ship was going down. He could feel it. The tremors. The structural groans. The secondary explosions firing off in the distance. He'd done more damage than he thought, and that made him smile through the blood and ash. He needed a way out. Most of the escape pods were torched. The fighter tubes were slag. But the Excelor had auxiliary drop shuttles, smaller, used for surface incursions and boarding operations. One of those, if still operational, could punch through the debris field and slip him out into orbit. From there, maybe, just maybe, he could drift toward an Earthcraft, or a beacon, or even just die in space instead of a burning alien tomb. He pulled himself towards the shuttle bay. Each hallway was a new hell. Fires burned unchecked. Walls bent inwards like the ship was folding under its own guilt. He passed Excelor bodies, some charred, others sliced, a few still twitching. None tried to stop him. None even looked alive. When he reached the shuttle bay, he paused, staring at the last working dropship. It was sleek, small, still humming with power. Luck again? Maybe. Or maybe this was fate pushing him just far enough to suffer a little more. He limped inside. The controls weren't intuitive. Excelor tech was always too smooth, too abstract. But he'd cracked their interface before, and this time was no different. He synced the neural chip, gritting through the sting as the needles sank into his temple. The display blinked to life. Auto-launch sequence initiated. He collapsed into the pilot seat, watching as the shuttle's systems spooled up. The docking clamps released. Thrusters engaged. And with a lurch that knocked the breath from his chest, the dropship shot out into open space. Silence. Real silence. Stars glittered ahead, distant and indifferent. Behind him, the Excelor ship burned, a silent inferno slowly tearing itself apart. Pieces broke away, drifting into the void. Blake watched as one of the engines flared and died, taking a chunk of the ship with it. He leaned back, bones aching, heart pounding. "I told you," he whispered hoarsely to the stars. "You wanted war." But peace wasn't coming yet. An alarm blared. The shuttle's scanners lit up. 3 blips, moving fast, Exolor interceptors. Of course they weren't done. Of course they wanted to make sure he didn't live long enough to celebrate. The shuttle was armed, but lightly. 1 plasma turret, automated. No countermeasures. No hyperdrive. Just enough to fight for a minute before being shredded. Blake stared at the incoming signals. They weren't firing yet. They were closing in, maybe to capture, maybe to confirm. Didn't matter. He'd taken down a ship. He'd sent the data. He didn't owe them fear. He switched the turret to manual, bracing himself in the cockpit. The first interceptor veered close. Too confident, too fast. Blake fired. The plasma bolt caught it dead center, ripping through its shield and tearing the engine apart. It spun, flamed, and vanished into dust. The second peeled off, evasive. The third opened fire. The shuttle rocked. Sparks flew from the control panel. A burst of light blinded his left eye. The viewport cracked. The turret turned sluggishly. Blake fired again. Missed. Another hit. The hull screamed. He was going down. The second interceptor looped behind, ready for the kill shot. Blake stared at the console. One option left. He could reroute all power to the turret. One last shot. A charge so strong it might overheat the entire weapon and melt the armature. But if it hit... He punched the override. The turret whined, charged, glowed hot white. The second interceptor looped into view. Blake didn't hesitate. He fired. The blast ripped through space, slamming into the enemy ship with a force that shattered its shield like glass. It exploded, a burst of fire and light. The third interceptor veered off, panicked. Retreating? Blake didn't see, because the feedback from the turret fried half the shuttle's systems, including the life support. The cabin chilled instantly. Oxygen hissed out from a seam. Lights died. He slumped in his seat, staring at the stars as the cold crept in. His breath fogged. His eyelids grew heavy. He'd done what he came to do. One man, one answer, and an empire brought to its knees. As the darkness closed in, he smiled. Not from pride, from defiance, because they'd remember his name now. And Earth would rise. The cold was worse than the pain. It snuck in under his skin, not like a stab or a burn, but like something crawling, something slow and invisible. Blake Riker drifted, his body still inside the shattered dropship, his mind flickering like a dying signal. He didn't know how long it had been since the last shot, the last explosion, the last breath that didn't fog up the view screen. Seconds? Minutes? Maybe hours. The cockpit was cracked wide open now, exposed to space. Emergency seals had done their best to hold the pressure, but life support was gone. He felt it in his chest, each breath tighter than the last, like his lungs were protesting the cold, refusing to suck in one more gasp of recycled air. He reached for the controls, but his fingers were stiff. Numbers. Maybe this was it. Funny, he thought he'd be angry when it came. He thought he'd rage or scream or go out with some poetic last words. But all Blake felt was stillness. He'd done what needed to be done. And if this was death, then so be it. He let his head fall back, eyes drifting shut, stars fading into the edges of his mind like the last embers of a dying fire. Then, light. Not the light of stars or explosions. This was artificial, controlled, white-blue and harsh, a docking light, a tractor beam. The ship lurched. Blake's eyes snapped open. Voices filled his ear, static heavy, garbled at first, then suddenly clear as his comm implant rebooted. Human vessel. Unidentified human vessel, respond. This is Outrider 2. We've got visual on you. Hold tight. His heart stuttered. Outrider. That was Earth Command. He wasn't dead. He wasn't alone. He tried to speak, but his throat was frozen shut. A gurgle escaped. Then darkness took him again. Not from pain, but relief. When he woke, he was warm. That confused him more than anything. For a second, he thought maybe he'd hallucinated the rescue. Maybe the warmth was just his brain's final trick, some comforting lie before everything shut off. But then he heard the hum of familiar machinery, smelled sterilized air, felt the stiffness of medical bandages wrapped around his ribs. He opened his eyes. Earth steel above him, gray, scratched, military grade. And a face, rough, scarred, human, looking down at him. "Holy hell," the man said, grinning like he'd seen a ghost. "You're awake." Blake tried to sit up. "Easy," the man said, gently pushing him back down. "You've been out for 2 days. We pulled you from that wreck floating just past lunar orbit. Oxygen was at 5%. I don't know how the hell you made it." Blake licked dry lips. His voice came out broken. "Where?" "Earth orbit. The Outrider fleet. What's left of it, anyway. We've been running ops since the attack. Skirmishes mostly, keeping them from landing more troops." Blake's head spun. "How long?" "Since I sent the node." "About 72 hours. We got it, every byte. The Exilor schematics, the Purifier blueprints, command hierarchies, fleet routes, all of it. You saved us, Riker." Blake blinked slowly. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like meat, used, bruised, barely stitched together. But hearing that the data made it real. "Status?" he croaked. "Earth?" The man's smile faded. "It's bad. Global comms are fragmented. Most major cities are gone. We've retaken a few zones, but it's a war now, not just an invasion." Blake closed his eyes. They'd lost so much, but now they had something. Hope. He spent the next week in recovery. Every hour was a fight between his body's need to rest and his mind's refusal to stay still. He watched feeds, broken as they were, from ground forces and orbital skirmishes. Humans were dying by the thousands, but they were fighting harder than ever. And the data Blake had stolen? It changed everything. Within days of decrypting the core schematics, Earth's engineers identified weaknesses in the Exilor armor. Tactical teams began exploiting blind spots in their orbital platforms. A strike in Siberia managed to take out an entire Exilor supply node using makeshift EMPs and jury-rigged plasma shells. Blake watched it all from his bed, jaw clenched. He needed to be out there. He needed to fight. The medics argued. Command protested. But by the end of the second week, Blake was back on his feet, stitched and limping and barely whole, but alive and angry. Command brought him in for a debrief the moment he could stand without puking. The war room aboard Outrider Prime was cramped, buzzing with energy. Screens flickered with intel. Officers barked orders. And in the center of it all, standing like a worn-out statue, was General Halford. "Riker," he said, nodding. "General, you did something no one else has done." Blake said nothing. "You hurt them. Bad." Still, Blake didn't speak. Halford stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We intercepted a transmission 2 hours ago. The Exilor. They issued a declaration, not to Earth, to their own people. You know what it said?" Blake shook his head. "They named you. Not your rank. Not your unit. Your name. Blake Riker. They called you the tear in the chain. Said you were a threat to their stability." Blake met Halford's eyes. "Good." The general chuckled. "I figured you'd like that." "What's the plan?" Blake asked. Halford turned to the main screen. A new Exilor ship had entered Earth's orbit. Bigger than the others. Heavily armored. Command class. That ship is called the Veil. Intel says it's carrying their high strategist, one of the bastards who ordered the first strike. Blake's eyes narrowed. You want me on it? Halford nodded. You've already done the impossible. You've survived them. Outsmarted them. Hurt them in ways we didn't think possible. If anyone can breach the Veil, it's you. Blake didn't hesitate. When do I leave? Now. The mission was surgical, a stealth craft, small team. Get in, find the strategist, cut off the head. But Blake knew better than to expect a clean job. Nothing was clean anymore. Every fight was a brawl. Every breath was earned. He boarded the shuttle with a new suit, reinforced armor, adaptive camo, and a weapon designed using the very data he'd stolen. A hybrid rifle that could punch through Exilor plating like it was paper. His squad was tight. No names, no ranks, just specialists. All of them survivors. All of them ready to die. Blake didn't bother learning their names. He couldn't afford to. As the shuttle breached orbit, the Veil came into view. It was massive, twice the size of the ship he'd destroyed. It loomed above Earth like a blade waiting to fall. Blake stared at it through the viewport. You wanted war, he muttered. Let's finish what we started. They called it the Veil for a reason. Blake Riker had seen a lot of Exilor tech, faced it, bled because of it, but nothing felt like this. The ship didn't look like a war machine. It was art, a black monolith suspended in space, no edges, no seams, no windows. It absorbed light, swallowed it. The human eye couldn't settle on it for more than a few seconds without some instinct deep in the brain screaming, "This isn't natural." Blake's shuttle coasted through its outer scan zone under full stealth. No lights, no sound. Inside, the only thing louder than the silence was the heartbeat pounding in his own ears. The pilot whispered, "We're latched to an outer vent shaft. Breach in 2. Blake nodded to his team. 4 shadows in adaptive armor, faces hidden. They moved like ghosts, silent, practiced. This wasn't their first mission, but it might be their last. He didn't waste time with speeches, didn't tell them what to do. If they were here, they knew the stakes. This wasn't about survival. It was about ending something before it killed what was left of Earth. The breach hissed open. Cold air rushed past them. Blake moved first, crawling into the shaft, rifle slung tight to his back. The shaft was cramped, slick with moisture, pulsing faintly like a throat. Every inch of the Veil felt alive, like it breathed through its own walls. He didn't like it. After 20 meters, the shaft opened into a service corridor. Dark. Empty. He dropped silently, crouching behind a bulkhead as the others followed. One by one, they fanned out. He tapped his HUD, bringing up the schematic, roughly pieced together from intercepted transmissions and what little intelligence Earth had managed to scrape from Exilor prisoners. The strategist was deep inside. Command deck, heavily shielded. He'd have to cut through 2 subcores, pass a weapons cache, and navigate a biosynthetic guard array. None of it mattered. This wasn't a job for diplomacy. This wasn't a strike. This was an execution. They moved fast, staying low, avoiding cameras and sensor threads. At every junction, Blake made the call. Go left, halt, drop one of the biomimic lures. Every step brought them closer to the strategist. But it wasn't long before they were noticed. It started with a tremor, then a high-pitched whine, like metal screaming. A blast door ahead slammed shut. Behind them, the wall opened. 3 Exilor burst from the shadows, their weapons humming with heat. One opened fire. The lead from Blake's team, a man they called Stone, went down hard. Half his helmet caved in, neck twisted. Blake didn't blink. He raised his rifle and fired 3 precise shots, one to the chest, one to the spine, one to the head. The Exilor dropped. His squad was already moving, the hallway turning into a storm of light and screaming metal. Grenades rolled. Plasma bolts scorched the walls. The air thickened with smoke and blood. Blake grabbed Stone's tags. Habit, maybe, or guilt. The others followed him through a vent chute, dropping into a lower level barely mapped on the schematic. This part of the ship was darker, older. The walls glistened with something that pulsed faintly blue, like veins. It wasn't just mechanical, it was alive. "Movement right flank," one of the team whispered. Blake swung left, catching a figure darting behind a column. Not Exilor, smaller. Human. Number. Not quite. It turned. Half its face was bone. The other half, metal. Its eye glowed. A hybrid. They'd started experimenting, splicing human prisoners into machines. Blake had heard the rumors. Now he saw them. The hybrid charged. Blake stepped forward and shot it in the leg. It dropped, screaming, not in pain, but rage. "Put it down," he said coldly. His teammate hesitated, just for a second, then did what needed doing. They moved on. By the time they reached the core shaft, only 3 remained. Blake, Wren, Cross. The rest were either dead or bleeding out in corridors that would soon melt under Exilor countermeasures. The shaft was vertical, 60 meters of climbing up through an open cylinder lined with light cables and energy coils. "We climb," Blake said. They didn't argue. Each meter burned. His muscles screamed. His ribs, never fully healed, pulled with every breath. But he climbed. Halfway up, an Exilor patrol spotted them. Blake didn't wait. He let go with one hand, swung his rifle, and fired upward. One Exilor fell. The others scattered. Wren lobbed a shock charge. Sparks rained down. They kept climbing. When they reached the top, the command deck door loomed. Blake didn't hesitate. He kicked it open. Inside was silence. And the strategist. Tall, pale, unarmored. It stood at the far end of a circular chamber surrounded by floating screens and humming glyphs. Its eyes were black voids, and it smiled as Blake entered. "You are the virus," it said in perfect English. "The flaw in our conquest." Blake stepped forward. "Number, I'm the cure to yours." The strategist laughed. "You think killing me will stop this?" "Number, I think killing you will make it hurt." The creature raised a hand. The floor shimmered. Dozens of hybrid units emerged, crawling from the walls, hissing. Wren fired first. The room exploded into chaos. Cross was ripped apart, dragged down under a swarm of claws. Blake and Wren fought back to back, shot after shot, blade after blade. Blake reached the strategist, breathing hard, soaked in sweat and blood. "You lose," he whispered. Then he raised his rifle and shot the creature point blank. Once, twice, 3 times. The strategist dropped, and everything went still. The hybrids froze. The ship groaned. A rupture echoed through the chamber. Self-destruct? Number something worse. A scream filled Blake's mind. Pure psychic agony. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The strategist twitched. Not dead, still alive. Wren shouted, "We need to go!" But Blake didn't move. He crawled forward, gritting through the pain, and pressed the barrel of his rifle against the strategist's skull. "No more speeches," he growled. Then he pulled the trigger. This time, it didn't move. The pain stopped. Silence returned. Wren pulled him up. "We've got 30 seconds to evac." They ran, through fire, through falling debris, through corridors breaking apart. They reached the shaft, jumped into a fallback chute, slid down into chaos. Their evac shuttle docked to a maintenance ring. Half damaged, engines barely humming, they jumped inside. Blake collapsed in the back, blood leaking from his side. Wren piloted. The shuttle peeled away. Behind them, the veil cracked open. Its core burst in a silent bloom of white-blue flame. It died screaming, and Earth watched it burn. They didn't cheer when the veil exploded. There were no parades, no speeches, no blaring trumpets, just silence. The kind of silence that settles after something ancient dies. The kind that leaves a ringing in your ears and a question in your chest. What now? Blake Riker sat on the edge of a temporary hospital cot aboard Outrider Prime, the shuttle bay still smeared with fuel streaks and soot. He hadn't said a word since the explosion. Not during evac. Not during the slow approach back to the fleet. Not even when the medics pulled Wren's shattered helmet off her head and whispered that she wouldn't make it through the night. The strategist was dead. The veil was gone. But so was half his team, and a part of himself. He could still feel the ghost of that scream, the psychic wail that tore through his skull as the strategist died. That wasn't just pain, that was memory, regret, hate so thick it curdled his blood. He knew what it meant. The war wasn't over. He was just the opening shot. An officer stepped into the room. Tall, young, trying to stand straighter than his nerves allowed. Commander Riker? Blake didn't correct him. He hadn't accepted a promotion. Didn't need a title. What? General Halford wants you in command. He said, it's urgent. Blake nodded once and stood, ignoring the soreness in his legs. The healing was slow. His ribs had been re-broken during the fight. His left hand had been partially scorched when Wren had shoved a shorted relay into his palm mid-firefight. Still, he moved like a man who didn't care about damage. Command was quiet when he arrived. No chatter. No blinking consoles. Just Halford, alone at the center table, staring at a frozen image of a planet Blake didn't recognize. Riker, he said without turning. General. Halford pointed to the screen. You know this place? Blake looked closer. The planet was small, dark green with strange rings around its equator. Number where is it? System 48, Sector Edge, deep Exalor space. We never knew it existed. So why do we care now? Halford turned. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from sleep, from grief. Because when the veil exploded, our probes picked up a chain reaction. That planet lit up with signal activity, their kind of signal. Short range, encrypted, highly localized, and fast. In less than 12 hours, 30 Exalor ships launched from that world. Blake frowned. They're responding to the strategist's death. Exactly. Then we should intercept them. Halford sighed. We can't, not all of them. They split. Half are going deep into Exalor territory. The others? He tapped the console. A new image appeared. Earth. They're coming here. Blake didn't flinch. How long? 4 days, maybe 5. They're using high-gravity sublight skips. We'll see them before they fire. Not that it'll matter. Each of those ships is equipped with a planetary-scale plasma deployment system. Purifiers? Halford nodded grimly. Smaller versions, but still enough to vaporize entire cities. Blake looked away, jaw tightening. We have the data, the weaknesses, the flight patterns. Why can't we stop them? We're trying. Every fleet asset we have is in orbit, but we're outnumbered, outgunned, and worst of all, out of time. Blake turned slowly. So what do you want me to do? The general tapped the console again. Another image appeared. A facility. Underground, remote, Arctic zone. What is that? It's called Project Grey Hand. Something your mission made possible. Blake narrowed his eyes. You said there were no weapons left. Halford shook his head. Not Earth weapons. It took him a second to understand. You're using Excelor tech. We're copying it, adapting it. Your data didn't just give us schematics, it gave us something else, something no one saw until the decryption was complete. Blake stepped closer. What? They're control keys. That stopped him. They're what? Halford leaned in. The Excelor operate on a hive-linked command system. Every unit, every soldier, every drone, they all respond to signal commands from their strategists. It's not full mind control, but close. Orders given at a neural frequency, bioresonant pulses. Blake's mind raced. So if we had a way to fake that, we could command them, Halford finished. Or at the very least, disrupt their hierarchy. Create confusion. Turn them on each other. Blake stared at the image of the facility. You tested this? Once, on a captured scout ship. The drone turned its weapons on its own handler. We shut it down before it could broadcast the event to the rest. And now, we're building a broadcast array. It needs to go live within 3 days. Once it does, we'll have a shot at turning this war. Blake didn't ask why he was being told all this. He knew. Something went wrong, he said quietly. Halford nodded. There was a breach, not Excelor, internal. Someone on the inside sabotaged the link core. The data's corrupted. The neural codes are scrambled. Blake folded his arms. So you need someone to go in, fix it, and hold off whatever's coming. Halford met his eyes. You're the only one who understands the Excelor structure well enough. The only one who's seen their command patterns in action, and more than that, you trust me to finish it. The general didn't answer. He didn't need to. Blake looked back at the screen. A dark world, an angry fleet, and a weapon that might be Earth's last hope. I'll leave in an hour, Blake said. No, Halford said firmly. You'll leave now. The flight to Grey Hand was silent. No escort, no broadcast. Even their route was off satellite, slipping under Excelor tracking nets to stay invisible. Blake sat alone in the shuttle's rear compartment, staring at the floor, rifle across his lap. He didn't fear death. He feared failure. Grey Hand sat beneath a glacier. No visible entrance. Only the biometric seal opened for the transport. The moment Blake stepped out, the cold punched him like a hammer. Worse than space. Worse than the Excelor ship. But cleaner. He was met by a team of engineers. No names, just tags, lead, signal, fire. They guided him inside. The core chamber pulsed with energy. At its center, a crystalline structure unlike anything human-made. The stolen Excelor tech shimmered with raw potential, cables feeding into it from all angles. It's unstable, Led explained. The sabotage wasn't physical. Someone tampered with the resonance protocols. Now the signal loops endlessly without transmitting. Blake nodded. Show me the neural map. They pulled it up. He stared for a long time, then smiled. It's not broken, he said softly. What? It's learning. The others looked confused. Blake stepped closer. They didn't destroy it. They triggered a learning mode. It's trying to understand who's speaking. Once it learns, it'll listen. Fire frowned. But it doesn't know we're human. No, Blake said. But it knows me. He stepped into the chamber. The air crackled. The crystal pulsed. And Blake spoke, not with words, with thought, with memory. He showed it the strategist, the hybrids, the war, the scream. He showed it pain and purpose. And then he whispered, "Obey." The crystal flared. Then, silence. A green light blinked. Signal acquired. Target locked. The array was online. They had one chance. And Blake would be the voice. The first time Blake Riker issued a command, the world held its breath. Inside the broadcast chamber of Project Grey Hand, the silence was absolute. Engineers stood frozen at their stations, eyes locked on the crystalline core that shimmered with otherworldly light. Cables hissed with static as the captured Exilor signal wound itself around Earth's systems, threading through relay satellites and deep space amplifiers. Blake stood at the center, strapped into a harness of neural threads that wrapped his skull like a crown of thorns. His body was anchored, but his mind floated somewhere between instinct and madness. He didn't speak with his mouth. He spoke through thought, through emotion, through rage. Across the void, on the edge of the solar system, Exilor ships broke from hyperspeed, their plasma cores flaring with silent fury. 30 vessels, each equipped with purifiers, each aimed at Earth. And Blake reached for them like a man stretching through the abyss. He didn't expect it to work. Not entirely, but it did. Not all the ships responded, not all obeyed, but 5 of them did. 5 massive warships stopped mid-burn and turned, slowly, deliberately, on their own. Inside Project Greyhand, a screen burst into color. Live feed. Exilor vessels firing at each other. Internal chaos. Command fractures. Blake's breathing slowed. Sweat trickled down his spine. The system worked. It responded to him. Not just his thoughts, but his intent. The system didn't just listen. It believed. And that scared him more than anything. Fire, the technician standing closest to the neural readout, stared at the monitor with wide, dry eyes. "He's in," she whispered. "He's inside them." Halford's voice came over the comm, rough and stunned. "Riker, can you push further?" Blake's voice rasped through gritted teeth. "I can try." He pushed harder. The 5 turned vessels began broadcasting pulses to the others. Some ignored it, but a few hesitated. Blake felt it. Not thought, not logic, but uncertainty. The hive link, whatever made the Exilor respond as one, it had gaps, places where fear leaked through. So Blake focused on that. Not on control, but on doubt. He showed them defeat. The death of the strategist. The fall of the Veil. The sound of their own kind screaming in agony. He wove it into his signal, and 10 more ships faltered. Some fired blindly into the dark. One exploded without provocation. Earth's satellites watched it unfold. The Exilor fleet, once a perfectly aligned sword of fire, now broke apart like glass struck at its weakest point. But it wasn't enough. 15 ships still moved forward. 15 vessels still burned for Earth. Blake's vision blurred. Blood seeped from his nose. "Too many," he gasped. "They're resisting." Halford's voice returned, harder now. "Can you stop them?" "I don't know, Blake's breath caught. His heart thundered. The system pushed back. It was never meant for human minds. His thoughts flickered. For a moment he was back on the Veil, dragging Wren's broken body through fire. Then he was on Earth, watching his sister's voice cut out over a broken comm. And then, nothing. A void. A voice inside his skull, not his own. "You are not strategist. You are anomaly." Blake gritted his teeth. "Number, I'm the correction." The voice snarled. "You are virus." And then he screamed, not aloud. Inside the system, he showed it Earth burning, then Earth fighting back. He showed it the broken streets of Manhattan, where children dug through rubble for water. He showed it Chicago, leveled to ash. He showed it the smile of Mason just before the Exilor snapped his spine. He didn't reason. He roared, and the signal cracked. 3 more ships flipped, firing into their allies, but 12 still came. 12 death machines. 12 chances to fail. Halford's voice returned. "We've scrambled the fleet. We'll intercept. You did enough, Riker. Pull out." But Blake shook his head, whispering, "Not yet." Because he'd seen something, deep inside the signal, a command thread, a hidden fallback. The Exilor had a contingency. If the fleet was compromised, if the strategist was dead, a signal would pulse back to the homeworld. And that signal would say, Earth is more than prey. It's a threat. And then the full fleet would come. Not 30 ships, not 100, thousands. This was their version of total war. Blake couldn't let that signal go out. He reached for the thread, his mind tearing at the code like a man clawing open a locked door. His body convulsed. Fire screamed through his nerves. The technicians shouted, alarms blaring, the crystalline core pulsing so violently it threatened to explode. But Blake didn't stop. He followed the thread and buried it, wiped it, killed it. Inside his mind, the Exilor voice howled, traitor, defiler, unworthy. Blake smiled through the pain. Get used to it. And then the world went white. When he woke, he was in a medbay, his head wrapped, his body cold. Halford stood at the end of the bed. You stopped it, he said quietly. The signal, the fleet, all of it. Blake didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was raw from screaming. His mind was shredded. But his eyes stayed fixed on Halford. And now? Blake whispered. The general nodded slowly. Now, we prepare. Because though the Exilor fleet had been broken, the war was only beginning. Blake Riker stood on the balcony of Earth Command's orbital ring, staring down at the planet he had nearly died to save. It looked smaller now, not because he was in space, but because of what he'd seen, what he'd become. The neural damage was permanent. The technician said he should have died the moment he crushed the last Exilor signal. No human brain could withstand the full spectrum of an alien Hive Command array without liquefying from the inside out. But Blake had survived. Again. He moved slower now. Sometimes he forgot things. Names, places, pieces of who he was. But the fire was still there. The purpose hadn't dulled. If anything, it had only grown sharper. Below him, Earth was rebuilding. Not thriving, not celebrating, just rebuilding. Cities rising from ash. Families burying the lost. Soldiers limping through med stations with faraway eyes. Humanity had won a battle, but the war had only curled its claws tighter around their future. The Exilor hadn't returned. Not yet. Blake's interference had bought time. Months, maybe a year. The signal he'd buried had been a final warning. And the Exilor. They didn't forget. But something had changed. They were afraid now, not of Earth's weapons, not of its ships, but of its people, of what one man had done. A voice broke his thoughts. You know, most men in your condition would have taken the medal and disappeared by now. Blake turned slowly. General Halford stood there, older somehow than he'd looked even weeks ago. Shoulders lower, eyes rimmed with lines that hadn't been there before. Blake gave a half smile. You think I care about medals? Halford grunted. Didn't think so. That's why I came. He handed Blake a small tablet. Classified clearance codes ran down the screen. A destination marked in red. What is it? Blake asked. Something we intercepted last week. Deep space relay out past the Jovian moons. Dead zone territory. It's not Exilor, at least not their usual tech. Blake scrolled. The file contained grainy footage, static warped visuals of a massive construct orbiting a dwarf star, angular, ancient. What am I looking at? Halford took a long breath. We think it's a seed, a construct left behind by whoever taught the Exilor how to build purifiers in the first place. Blake stiffened. They didn't invent them. Halford shook his head. They adapted them, like parasites, fast learners. But someone gave them the blueprint, maybe thousands of years ago. Blake stared at the footage. The structure pulsed faintly, still alive. Why show me this? He asked. Halford met his gaze. because you're the only one who understands how deep this goes. If we don't strike first, someone else will. And if that construct is still active, Blake already knew. It'll start again. Halford nodded. You want me to lead another mission? No. Halford's voice lowered. I want you to decide if this war ends, or if it becomes something worse. Blake looked back at Earth. Wren's face flashed in his mind. Mason's last laugh. The voice of his sister lost on day one. He nodded. I'll go. The vessel was small. No escort, no broadcast. Just Blake, a single recon pilot named Keenan, and a ship fitted with stealth armor scavenged from Exelor wreckage. They called it Ash 1. It fit. As they neared the coordinates, Blake sat in the cockpit's rear seat, helmet off, suit powered down. The neural scars still burned when he got close to Exelor frequencies, but he could handle it. Pain didn't scare him anymore. What do you think it is? Keenan asked quietly, his hands steady on the controls. Blake didn't answer at first. Then, a question. Keenan glanced back. What kind of question? Blake stared out at the black. The kind with only one answer. The construct came into view like a ghost. It wasn't just massive, it was wrong. Every angle bent light in ways the human eye couldn't make sense of. It felt hostile, not in aggression, but in indifference, like it existed before things like mercy or thought. Keenan whistled. Hell of a thing, Blake stood. Drop me in. Sir, this is a recon run, no insertion protocol. Command didn't authorize. I'm not asking. Keenan hesitated, then nodded. The drop pod was old, scarred from past missions. Blake climbed in, sealed the hatch, and breathed deep. He didn't feel fear, only certainty. As the pod ejected, gravity seized him. The stars spun. The construct loomed. He hit the outer hull with a heavy clang, magnetized boots locking on. The surface was cold. Dead. But beneath his feet, it thrummed. Alive, he moved across it, each step slower. The Exelor data fed into his HUD, highlighting symbols etched into the metal. None matched the known lexicon. This was older, simpler, primal. A hatch opened as he approached. It had been waiting. Inside, the corridors were silent. No life, no guards, no resistance, just invitation. Blake pressed on. Eventually, he reached the core, a chamber the size of a cathedral. At its center, a sphere floated, glowing faintly. Around it, shapes moved. Not machines, not flesh, something in between. And then, a voice, not like the Exelor, not angry, just curious. You are the ripple. Blake swallowed hard. Who are you? The origin, the fire that taught the Exelor how to burn. Why? Because they asked. Blake took a step forward. They came to you? Number they reached, hungered, desired power. We gave them a match. They lit the world. Blake felt his stomach twist. How many? Many. Not just them. Others. Your kind is not first, not last. You built the purifiers? We showed them the shape of destruction. What they did with it was beautiful. Blake's hands curled into fists. They killed billions. And learned. You did too. Blake stared at the floating sphere. You sent the Exelor to us. They chose. You started this war. You are here to end it. He didn't respond. Because he realized something. This wasn't a weapon. This was a teacher, and the Exelor had been its students. Now it wanted a new one. You learned their code, broke their will. You are ready. Blake shook his head. I'm not here to learn. Then you are here to destroy. He stared at the core. Thought of Earth. Thought of what would happen if this thing ever reached another race, another planet, another child crying under rubble. Yes. The chamber dimmed. Then choose the fire. Blake raised the pulse charge from his belt, armed it. The sphere pulsed. "You will burn with me," he nodded. "I know," and pressed the trigger. Back on Ash 1, Keenan watched the construct flare, once, bright as a star, and then collapse into itself, silent and final. There were no words, no screams, just light, and then darkness. Blake Riker was gone. But Earth would never forget the man who answered war with fury and ended it with silence.